Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandra Brooke Gordon. I'm the Avery Director of the Library here at the Huntington. And on behalf of the library and of my colleague, Dr. Susan Juster, the W.M. Keck Foundation Director of Research, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Rothenberg Hall and the 2026 Shapiro Lecture. As cannot have escaped you, we are living through a time when America's civic square can feel more fraught than fruitful, and when the ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness have never seemed more important, but the pathway to achieving their promise as a nation doesn't always seem clear. As we navigate our way through this consequential anniversary, we are deeply gratified to have at the Rothenberg podium Dr. Danielle Allen, James Bryant Conant University professor at Harvard, who will be speaking to us tonight on the topic of democracy and the Declaration across 250 years. This distinguished lecture is named in honor of L. Dennis and Susan R. Shapiro, who in 2019 established the Shapiro Center for American History and Culture at the Huntington. Through Dennis and Susan's vision and generosity, the Huntington now has a robust entity dedicated to advancing scholarship, knowledge, and understanding of American history and culture, especially of the early republic and of the nation's founders and leaders. Through lectures, fellowships, and a signature biennial book prize, as well as exhibitions, cataloging, and digitization projects, the Shapiro Center is an engine for promoting use of the Huntington Library's premier collections in this field, which are unique west of the Mississippi. Home to hundreds of archival collections and more than 200,000 individual manuscripts, rare books, prints, photographs, and ephemera documenting the history of the United States, the Huntington Library has special strength in the American Revolution and early Republic, and is famous for its collections of the nation's founders, especially the papers of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. These distinguished holdings were augmented in 2019 when Dennis and Susan also donated their own distinguished collection of some 340 rare manuscripts focused primarily on American presidential administrations from the 18th through the early 20th centuries. Individually and collectively, this was a stunning addition to the library's holdings. Getting to know Dennis and Susan and working with them to establish the Shapiro Center was, for me and President Karen Lawrence, one of the most gratifying moments in our time at the Huntington. We are grateful to have been able to share the first Shapiro Lecture, which was delivered by historian Annette Gordon-Reed, with Dennis and Susan in 2020, only a few months before Dennis's untimely passing. Dennis and his collecting accomplice, Susan, were discerning collectors with a laser focus on letters and documents that embody a life, an ethic, or a hinge in history. And their collection was a tremendous contribution to the Huntington Library. It's an honor and joy to have our dear friend and Huntington Governor, Susan Shapiro, in the audience tonight, along with several members of the Shapiro family. Susan, thank you. It should be no surprise that the Huntington would take to heart this essential American anniversary in 2026, just as it did in 1926 and 27, when the library mounted a hugely popular America at 150 exhibition, and in 1976, when it sponsored an array of bicentennial commemorations. A century later, the Shapiro Lecture is part of a larger Cross-Huntington This Land Is initiative that invites visitors to reflect on the American story from before 1776 to the present through the lens of land. The initiative includes art museum installations, a new Oak Meadow garden, and research programs and public events for a wide range of audiences, including an all-day community festival next Sunday. If you haven't got your tickets, there's still time. The This Land Is initiative is anchored by a major library exhibition of the same name, curated by Josh Garrett Davis, H. Russell Smith Foundation Curator of the American West, and Lindy Lettinen, the Philip D. Nathanson Senior Curator of Photography. This Land Is, the exhibition, is on view in the Mary Lou and George Boone Gallery now through early 2027. Moving from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from pre-colonial America to the 21st century, the exhibition presents multiple perspectives on the American project. At a time when listening can seem in short supply, I invite you to spend some quality time in the Boone Gallery. Listen and converse with the many people you will meet there, from Thomas Jefferson and Woody Guthrie to the Karomi family, Langston Hughes, Otis Marston, Noni Alubisi, and many more. And you'll find on view there two of the Huntington's 6 July 1776 printings of the Declaration of Independence. These conversations with peoples past and present, channeled through archives and artifacts, can, I hope, help us all think differently, more deeply, about the meaning and promise of this national anniversary. I can promise a visit to This Land Is will repay the investment of your time. A great deal of collaborative thought went into planning the Huntington's America at 250 commemorations. And Danielle Allen's widely acclaimed book, Our Declaration, a reading of the Declaration of Independence in Defense of Equality, published in 2015, became a touchstone for many of us. And that includes President Karen Lawrence, to whom we are grateful for reaching out and making the connection with Dr. Allen, resulting in this evening's lecture. MacArthur Genius Grant Fellow Dr. Danielle Allen is a professor of political philosophy, ethics, and public policy at Harvard University, who draws an arc from the American founding to the present to explore how the original vision of the Declaration of Independence can serve us still, even as we also recognize and remedy its imperfections. Dr. Allen is James Bryant Conant University Professor at Harvard University, and she is also director of the Allen Lab for Democracy Renovation at the Harvard Kennedy School and director of the Democratic Knowledge Project, a research lab focused on civic education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. A professor of political philosophy, ethics, and public policy, she is also a seasoned nonprofit leader, democracy advocate, tech ethicist, and distinguished author. And you will have seen some of her books we have for sale in the lobbies. There are signed copies, and you may want to stop there on the way out. Dr. Allen is a contributing columnist at The Atlantic, winner of the 2025 Barry Prize, and was the 2020 winner of the Library of Congress Kluge Prize, which recognizes scholarly achievement in disciplines not covered by the Nobel Prize. She received the prize for her internationally recognized scholarship in political theory and her commitment to improving democratic practice and civics education. Across nearly 3 decades in higher ed, she's worked to make the world better for young people. She won the Quantrell Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching at the University of Chicago, where she also served as the Dean of the Division of Humanities. She chaired the board of the Mellon Foundation as that foundation expanded the range of institutions in which it invests. She wrote for the Washington Post from 2008 to 2024 with a column on constitutional democracy. And she has developed a public policy portfolio on issues from cannabis legislation and public health policy to democracy renovation, civic education, and sound governance of and with new technology. As a scholar, Dr. Allen currently concentrates on democracy renovation, studying how to reconnect people to their civic power, experience, and responsibility, and how to redesign our political institutions to improve their responsiveness, increase the accountability of office holders, and reward the participation of ordinary citizens. This is very important work. Called a compelling major statement by one of the most important influential and original political philosophers working today. Her landmark book, Justice by Means of Democracy, provides the foundation for this work. Her latest book, The Radical Duke: How One Aristocrat and the American Revolution Transformed Britain, is a consequential study that demonstrates how revolutionary ideas emerged in London before spreading to the American colonies. A bit of housekeeping. After Danielle Allen's lecture, she'll be joined on the stage by my colleague, Sue Juster, the Huntington's Director of Research, and a specialist herself in early American history. After Danielle and Sue's conversation, there'll be time for audience questions. Please avail yourselves of the card in your program to post questions for our speaker. Just write your question down and they'll be collected before the Q&A. And then everyone will be invited to repair to the Rose Hills Foundation Garden Court just outside for refreshments and conversation. And a quick reminder, if you haven't already, do please silence your cell phones. And now it is a joy and an honor to have Dr. Danielle Allen deliver this year's Shapiro Lecture. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage for Democracy and the Declaration Across 250 Years.
That was just such a generous introduction. Thank you. Good evening, friends. It is such a pleasure and honor to be here with all of you. I am so grateful that you have made time in what I am sure are very busy lives to join me this evening for reflection on this exceptionally large question, democracy and the Declaration across 250 years. But we'll try to hone in on that to the question of the reflection that each of us as an individual in our journey might partake in as a part of this moment of both celebration and reckoning on the nation's 250th. I want to pause for a moment and just thank Director Brooke Gordon for that exceptionally generous introduction. My mother's here, so I know she enjoyed it. I also want to thank the Shapiro family. I'm not sure where you are, but thank you for your extraordinary contributions to the Huntington, to the worlds of scholarship, and to the worlds of understanding of the American legacy. Thank you to President Lawrence. I'm not sure where you've gotten to, but I'm also so grateful to you for hosting me. And I also want to thank the curators of the remarkable exhibit that you just heard Dr. Brooke Gordon mention. How many of you have already been to see This Land Is? Good. Okay, good. Some of you, but I see many hands did not go up yet. So let me say, I had the good fortune just of visiting it for the hour before this, and it is the richest exhibit for the 250th that I have yet had the chance to see anywhere in the country. Okay? There's something very special about it that I want to just communicate to you as we get started here. I am from Massachusetts, and so of course in Boston, we do think we have a rather important story to tell about the 250th. And I spent a fair amount of time in Philadelphia, which also thinks it has a rather important story to tell. And indeed, both cities do have important stories to tell. But on the East Coast, for the 250th, most people in their storytelling are really focusing on the 18th century. And what's phenomenal about this exhibit is it covers the whole sweep of American history and across the entirety of the continent and all the different streams of people, different experiences, the challenges as well as the triumphs of our history, and it forms a tapestry. I really do urge you to take the time to go see it. I think you will find it quite moving. So thank you to the curators as well for that beautiful exhibit. So I am, as you heard, a lot of things. I kind of do a lot of things. So people always will say to me, well, Danielle, what do you actually do? And the short of it is I work on democracy, past, present, and future, with no question mark at the end of that. Appreciate that. Thank you. I like to share that is a commitment and kind of honestly monomaniacal focus that I come by super honestly. It's a matter of my family inheritance, for starters. So on my mom's side of the family, my great-grandparents fought for women's right to vote. And my great-grandmother ended up as president of the League of Women Voters in Michigan in the 30s. And I love to celebrate my great-granddad, who marched with suffragists on Boston Common in 1917. And we forget just how hard that year was. In 1917, Woodrow Wilson actually had military in the streets of Washington, D.C. to suppress the protests of suffragists. Women were being thrown into prison. They were being treated abominably. They were going on hunger strikes. Then they were being very brutally force-fed. It was really desperate times. And that often, I think, for me, brings perspective to this question of this sort of journey of the pursuit of liberty in this country. Why did my grandparents do that? Why did they prioritize fighting for the right to vote over material safety? Because at the end of the day, they understood empowerment to be the bedrock for human thriving and well-being. On my dad's side, too, same thing. My granddad helped found one of the first NAACP chapters in northern Florida in the 40s. Now, that was a time in northern Florida where lynchings were on the rise. So he was literally taking his life into his hands to fight for the right to vote. I was fortunate that I grew up in a family that had this view that, again, empowerment is the bedrock of human well-being, at the heart of our culture and sort of early lessons. Now, if you say that empowerment is at the bedrock of human thriving, what that means is that you think that sort of people live well, they most achieve their full potential when they can steer their own lives in the private sphere, but then also, really importantly, steer together with others in public. That's what democracy fundamentally is. That's what the right to vote is about. That is what all the other ways we have of participating in our communities are about. At the same time that I was lucky to have this inheritance that connected me to the American tradition, a tradition both of claiming basic rights and of recognizing that they have very often been under pressure and that we have to find the resilience to work to secure them. Despite having that tradition and really taking democracy for granted as a young person, I will admit that as I came of age, I had my own crisis of confidence in our democracy. As I came of age and watched my generation come up in the world, I watched this real split of life paths. Some of us, such as myself, had incredible opportunities. Tenured professor at a great university. It really doesn't get better than that. I'm like, forget Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. Like, tenured faculty member at Harvard is pretty darn good. Okay? On the other hand, though, in my extended family, I have many cousins who are no longer on this earth. And we have lost them. So kids I used to run around in the streets playing football with, we have lost to addiction, to gun violence, to incarceration, to severe mental illness. All the things that we struggle with so hard in our society. My youngest cousin ended up in prison in the 1990s here in Southern California. And this was a very hard and difficult time. And I'm coming to him because he is actually the reason that I have had a journey with the Declaration of Independence for the last 25 years. All right? And so what my hope is for you tonight is what I want to do is share with you my journey with the Declaration of Independence, what I've learned from that journey. And I hope in the process to be able to reconnect each of you to a fundamental part of your inheritance as somebody who lives in this great land. Now, when I say I've been on a journey with the Declaration of Independence for 25 years, I find that kind of astonishing. I mean, it's true, I have been, and I never expected that in my own career. Last thing I ever imagined I'd be doing. But to say that means I've been journeying with the Declaration of Independence, literally the text of it, the words, and I'll come back to that in a minute, for a tenth of the life of the country. And when I say that out loud, it makes me realize that in my 50-plus years on the planet, that means I've been alive for a fifth of the life of the country. And my beautiful mom has been alive for headed toward a third of the life of the country. Wow. That means we are an incredibly young country. We're sort of like a pimply hormonal teenager. So no wonder it's really bad right now. And it's gonna be okay. All right, I just want you to carry that with you. We're really just kind of like in our teenage years right now. So this journey that I've been on with the Declaration, as I said, it started because of my cousin Michael. Michael did a terrible thing at the age of 15, Southern California. He committed an attempted carjacking, and that landed him in prison on first arrest for 12 years and 8 months. And that was the time in this state when our punishment system was at its most severe and intense, and education was being stripped out of the prisons. As a result, I worked really hard to try to get Michael education through correspondence courses from colleges around the country. And it was really, really hard work. There were so many sort of rules and regulations. You couldn't send any course in that assigned hardback books, for example, because hardback books were forbidden. So you had to sort of sort through the syllabus, figure out where were the paperback books, et cetera. At any rate, I spent a number of years doing that. At the same time, I was becoming a young assistant professor at the University of Chicago. And there I had the opportunity to help build a night course for low-income adults. And I leapt at the chance. This was being sponsored by the Illinois Humanities Council. I leapt at it because I loved my University of Chicago students, but I also had this deep sense that there were a lot of other talented people in the world, like my cousin Michael, who desperately needed the same education as we were giving in the University of Chicago. And I was desperate to be able to teach them too. So I leapt at the opportunity, and then we had a conundrum. We had a goal in this night course. We were going to be serving low-income adults who had often not finished high school. They were often working 2 jobs, juggling childcare and public transportation. Chicago's public transportation, let me tell you, not good. All right, so tough things that they are trying to manage. And so how were we, when we had the aspiration to give them the same quality of education as we gave to our University of Chicago students, how are we going to pull that off? Well, we puzzled over this, and then we came to a solution. We would not compromise on the quality of the material we gave. We would not compromise on the quality of instruction. We would not compromise on our expectations. But we would compromise, we decided, on the length of the texts that we assigned. And for that completely instrumental reason, I started teaching the Declaration of Independence. Because it is 1,337 words. Nobody was going to complain that the reading was too long. So we taught it in history, and we taught it in philosophy, and we taught it in literature, and we taught it in writing. And it was the most explosive teaching experience of my career. My night students responded to the text so powerfully and so quickly, faster than my well-prepared, well-heeled day students at the University of Chicago. Why? Because they went to the heart of the text. The Declaration of Independence is a story of agency, human agency. Some people survey their circumstances. They say, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary. They find those circumstances wanting. They decide to set their faces in a new direction. They articulate some principles for where they want to go, lay out some complaints, and then they link arms and say, we're going forward together. And that's exactly what all of my night students were doing. They were in that class to change their lives. They were ready to articulate what was wrong in the world around them. They were ready to lay out their commitments and march forward. And sure enough, in our class, quite soon, they were laying out grievances about the city of Chicago and thinking about how to engage with the city. They were laying out grievances with their employers and thinking about what they needed to do to change their work environment and context. But it was just this incredibly moving experience. And another thing that was moving and powerful about it was that I found that my night students shared with me that they had, for the most part, never previously encountered the Declaration of Independence. I had this deep sense that their inheritance had been withheld from them. Now, I don't use that word inheritance lightly. And when we talk about the Declaration, we are always pulled and torn between its high ideals and then, of course, all of the traumas and acts of oppression that also are part of our country's history. And it's actually in one of the moments of greatest strife and contest, actually, that someone produced the most profound statement about what the nature of that inheritance is. It was Abraham Lincoln, won't surprise you for me to say that, in the context of the Civil War. Now, Abraham Lincoln often invoked the Declaration. He often said that he didn't have a single political intuition that didn't come from the Declaration of Independence. But he also said another really beautiful thing, which was that he called the Declaration of Independence the golden apple set in a frame of silver, which is the Constitution. The idea was that the Declaration is actually what this project of freedom and being a community of free and equal self-governing citizens, the Declaration is about that. The Constitution is just the frame that holds this commitment of founding principle in place. So I want to make sure that you, before we leave tonight, can take the golden apple with you. But I also want to reflect for a moment about why it can be hard to receive the golden apple. What is it about our inheritance that makes it so hard to take in sometimes? So let me, first of all, just give you the actual golden apple, and then we'll talk about why it can be hard to receive it. So the golden apple, Lincoln also references in the Gettysburg Address when he describes that terrible war and battlefield as being a place where those men who had fallen had dedicated their lives to the proposition that all men are created equal, or all people are created equal, as we would say. And in naming that there, Lincoln is being very clear about the part of the Declaration, again, that is the golden apple. So I'm going to give it to you now, so you can take it away, all right? This is my 250th birthday present. I can toss you all a golden apple, okay? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among people, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That's the golden apple. Now be honest, how many of you remembered that that sentence was that long? It really is. It's really one sentence. That's how Jefferson wrote it. That's how Adams copied it out. That's how the Secretary of Congress wrote it out. One sentence, and I'll come back to it in a minute and its content. But I want to pause first on the fact that I'm tossing you that. Everything you want to know about democracy, everything you want to know about what is it about equality and freedom that is fundamental to human well-being, it's in that sentence. It's all packed in there. And yet that inheritance can be really hard to receive. You heard me change the word men to people. I'm sure you're wondering about Thomas Jefferson. You're thinking, well, but wasn't Thomas Jefferson a slave owner? So this stuff about equality, how seriously can we take it? Am I right? We've got defenses up, yeah? We've got defenses up. So I want to address those worries. And as I do, what I will be doing, my effort here, is to show you the way in which those ideals were real from the beginning and also always contested, okay? So for starters, about Jefferson, there are many things that we can learn from Jefferson. They do include how to get credit for something. I'm not kidding, because his tombstone says, right, you all know, author, Declaration of Independence. That's the main reason we think that Jefferson wrote the Declaration as a solo act. He did not write the Declaration as a solo act. It was a committee of 5 people who drafted the declaration. He was the chair of the committee and therefore the lead draftsman. But the other members were John Adams from Massachusetts, who never held people in bondage, always objected to slavery, was already working against it. Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania, who had earlier in his life held people in bondage, but by 1776 had repudiated the practice and was an active abolitionist. Roger Sherman from Connecticut and Robert Livingston from New York. It's John Adams, actually, who gave us the phrase pursuit of happiness. The more conventional formulation at the time would have been life, liberty, and property. That was the standard sort of 18th century formulation for rights, but that word property had already become activated in the politics of the year 1775 and 1776 in defense of slavery. And as I mentioned, Adams was against slavery. So pursuit of happiness gave a way of communicating what human beings' sort of purposive nature is about. We are all trying to make the world better tomorrow than it was yesterday, without getting entangled in questions of slavery. The draft also actually had a critique of the slave trade in it, the first draft that the committee submitted to Congress. And they criticized King George for violating the sacred rights of life and liberty of a distant people in Africa. So the very same language of sacred rights applied to that distant people in Africa. Congress cut that passage out. It went too far. They kept pursuit of happiness. It was vague enough to let them compromise. So there was a compromise around slavery baked into the Declaration. But that language, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, was an abolitionist phrase. And indeed, abolitionists used it immediately. January of 1777, Prince Hall, a free African American in Boston, used the language of the Declaration to submit a petition to the General Court, the Colonial Assembly in Massachusetts, in order to abolish slavery. And that petition failed, but before the end of Revolutionary War, because of other legal actions in Massachusetts, Massachusetts did abolish slavery, as did Pennsylvania and Vermont. Vermont wasn't a state at the time. It was its own country, still kind of its own country. But those 3 places, 2 states, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, and then Vermont country, all abolished slavery before the end of the Revolutionary War. And they did so drawing directly on the language of the Declaration of Independence. So I share that just to communicate how significantly more than one voice shaped the Declaration of Independence. And those questions of slavery were contested from the very beginning, and an abolitionist tradition existed from the very beginning. Now, all right, what about women? What about the place of women in the Declaration? So we are not the first ones to ask that question, and I'm sure many of you know about Seneca Falls, the Declaration of the Rights of Women that came out of that, drawing on the Declaration of Independence. But the questions there went way back to the beginning. Abigail Adams wrote to her husband John in the spring of 1776. She was very frustrated. She thought the men in Philadelphia were being too slow to move to independence. She kept trying to rush them along. She's like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Like, when is this thing coming? So as John was drafting materials for Congress and for the Declaration of Independence, Abigail asked him about the place of women in what was being drafted. She wrote, "Remember the ladies. Where do they fit in this picture that you're offering?" And John's response back was that there were 2 parts of the work. And if you listened carefully to the Golden Apple, you will have picked them up. And I'll give it to you again in a minute so you'll hear it again. But there are 2 parts of the work of being a democratic citizen. You have to lay the foundation of our democracy on a set of principles, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all people being created equal. And then you also have to organize the powers of government. You have to have that constitution that's telling us how we build institutions to actually try to solve problems together as a disagreeing, rambunctious, crazy people who definitely are never all going to think the same thing, okay? So both got to have those principles and then the institutions. And so when Abigail wrote to ask about, well, where do the ladies fit in? What about us? John wrote back and said, as he did as well when actually people wrote him to ask about men without property and to ask him about free blacks. He got letters on all of these subjects. And to everybody, he said essentially the same thing. The principles apply to everybody. He literally meant, as even did Jefferson, that the rights, the idea that everybody has basic human rights is universal. Men, women, black, white, everybody, rich, poor. But, he said, with regard to the powers of government, he wrote to Abigail, we will retain our quote-unquote masculine system. for the organization of power. So that was where the mistake came in. And Abigail wrote back, all right? Abigail wrote back and she said, look, husbands have a history of tending to tyranny. That was the word she used. That was the word she used, all right? And she said, all right, so we'll give you one more chance. But, she said, I'm not sure that we women will consider ourselves bound by laws in which we have no voice or representation. We may, she wrote, have to foment a rebellion for voice and representation. And in saying that, Abigail was in fact articulating a deep philosophical truth. You cannot protect the rights of all while putting power in the hands only of some. If you are indeed going to protect the rights of all, then all have to share in power. So Abigail expressed that as early as 1776. And much of the rest of our history has been the contest over how to make that real. I don't have time now to go through the story of Frederick Douglass and the story of Seneca Falls and the work of the suffragists and the work of Martin Luther King Jr. and the work of the LGBTQ movement, but that has been the story all along. How do we learn how to share power amongst ourselves, different as we are in so many ways? And Abigail, already there at the beginning, named that as the work and the project. So I share that to help open up the Declaration of Independence for you. It is a text that had an abolitionist voice in it. It's not just Jefferson's voice that you're listening to when you hear it. It is a text that people at the time already understood, spoke to people who were ruled out of systems of power, and could be used by them to start to open up systems of power. And in that regard, what it has been from the very beginning is just a motor for that dynamic effort to achieve that full sharing of power and responsibility that can make us a true democracy. That phrase, that full sharing of power and responsibility, that's Dr. King. That's a phrase he wrote when he was trying to articulate his vision at the very end of his life. That is what we are fundamentally striving for, a full sharing of power and responsibility. Lincoln summed up that idea most pithily in the Gettysburg Address, again, to come back there. And when he concludes that address by saying that what we've built in this country, and we're rebuilding in the Civil War, and have been rebuilding generation after generation, is a country whose purpose is to be for the people, and it will achieve that when it is by the people. All right, so that speech concludes with his saying that he hopes that never will perish from the earth a government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that phrase tells you everything. It is for the people when it is by all the people. And that is, again, that commitment to the notion that we can find ways to share power with each other. So now, to conclude my remarks before we open up the conversation, I just want to give you the golden apple one more time, okay? So I want you to be able to literally take it away and understand that it belongs to you. It belongs to you. And it kind of doesn't matter like what crazy things or what good things anybody else has done with it. It has genuine human power in it. And its power comes from that first fundamental proposition that we are all created equal. If you can put that in your heart, the world looks different. Okay, you ready? Okay. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among people, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them, as to us, shall seem most likely to effect our safety and happiness. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The 18th century did love a long sentence, didn't it?
It's true, they did, exactly.
They loved those long sentences. Hearing you talk about the book brought back to me sort of the power and excitement of when I read it for the first time. So that was lovely to sort of to hear that. So I want to spend a little more time talking about two terms that have been so central to the Declaration and the project of American government that grew out of it, one of which is in the Declaration, equality. The linchpin term, which you, I think, have made such a fantastic and persuasive case for, being the linchpin of the entire Declaration, and one term which is not in the Declaration, which is democracy. So if you go back to that phrase that you've just read us again, twice, and it's always as chilling and powerful to me when I hear it, one of the things that strikes me is that the Declaration says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, suggesting that there might be other, unalienable rights that either future generations might discover or that are still to be discovered within that generation. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about whether you think that list of unalienable rights that are so central and that we hold so dear has changed or expanded over time? Are there terms that is there any terms that there might be a consensus among Americans today might add to it? Or are we just as bitterly divided about that as everything else is today?
No, I think it's a wonderful question. Thank you. And I appreciate it because your question extends the invitation that is implicit in the text. Right. When the text says among which, it means we're getting some examples. We're not getting a complete list. And that is an invitation to think about what else belongs there. So yes, I think Roosevelt was seeking to expand the list when he talked about the four freedoms, right? He talked about freedom from want and freedom from fear as a part of that. So I think he's adding to the idea of basic rights there. I think at this point, health is a basic right. And I think a very substantial, so as a substantial part of the population, I think, would agree with that. As so in this room, to some meaningful extent, as people do. Do we continue to debate it? For sure, we do. And then we also continue to debate the sort of how you actually recognize and protect those rights once you acknowledge that they're there.
Right, exactly. And I think I might add to that list the right to belong to a place that so that you have a home. I think that the idea that people can be stateless is something that should not be allowed, right? So the right to belong, the right to have a home, and the right to have a home that recognizes you and pulls you into that might be another. Would be interested if others in the audience have other suggestions to perhaps to add to that list. So I think it is a live list. It is not a closed off set of rights.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like your point about the right to belong. I agree with you. I mean, I think the fact that as a globe, we have not figured out how to address the problem of statelessness is a deep human tragedy. And I would agree. I mean, everybody has a right to belong to a society in which they have rights, right? Those two pieces together.
Yeah. Do you think that the term equality has lost some of its luster, some of its value, some of its power to us today? I think about how, in the guise of the term equity and the way in which equity was linked to terms like diversity and inclusion and politicized in that context, I wonder if we have lost some of our commitment to the idea of equality.
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's actually important to say that there's a really fundamental difference actually between equality and equity. And this, you'll have to forgive me, okay? I am a philosopher at the end of the day and a bit of a pedant, all right? So every now and then, I sort of drift into a kind of philosophical lecture. so forgive me. So equity is a really old term. It goes back to Aristotle. And Aristotle introduces it. It becomes a term that sort of flows into the legal tradition. He introduces it specifically to rectify places where a legal structure has gone wrong, where a legal structure has led to injustice. The point is that although the law is generally written in order to try to protect justice, no general rule can ever be perfect. It will always get something wrong, and it will produce remainders and mistakes over time. And so equity you bring in to correct errors in a legal system. Equality is about the starting place, right? That we are, as human beings with purposes, with capacity for judgment, trying to make tomorrow better than yesterday, we are fundamentally the same in that regard. And so we owe each other something based on that equality. And so everything we build should start with that commitment in it. And then when we screw up, equity comes in as a corrective.
Yeah. That's a great and really important distinction. Thank you. Because I think the term has lost some of its coherence and some of its clarity, in part because of the way other terms have come in and been so politicized. So let's talk a little bit about democracy, which I know you have spent much of your career thinking about, and in ways that are so impressive to me, who is at heart a sort of an academic, not just thinking about, but working to fix and improve. So of course, the authors of the Declaration did not necessarily think, right, that they were laying down the foundation for democratic government to replace the British monarchy. Democracy was more feared than admired for most people, I would say, in the 18th century.
There was a big debate about it. Yeah, it
Yeah.
depends on whether you're Thomas Paine or Richard Henry Lee. Right? And Thomas Paine was like, let's burn it all down.
Yes, he
That was Thomas Paine's orientation.
Yes.
Right?
That's true. That's true.
Whereas others were, yes, more concerned to
Right.
protect the sort of hierarchical structures that they were deeply familiar
Right.
with.
Right. But so if democracy is that sort of silver frame around which holds that golden apple, and we've constructed it over a long and complex and challenging period, but for most of our modern history, we have been proud to call ourselves a democracy, right? It has been so central to our identity as a people. And we think democracy is who we are, and we have mostly thought it's a good thing. But we're seeing a real alarming erosion of that consensus today. And I think when I was looking at your Democratic Knowledge Project for reinvigorating civics teaching, and one of the things that was so disturbing, one of the findings of that project, is that only about 30% of people under the age of 40 today consider it essential to live in a democracy. That was figured would have been 70%.
That was
right?
in 2018, I will say. So hopefully it's
Do you think it's
made a little
improved?
progress. I don't actually know if we have improved or not, but just
Yeah.
want to say there's a chance we might have improved since 2018.
You are more of an optimist than I am. I think about this. So what happened, right? What happened to that erosion of saying that where most Americans thought that it was essential to live in a democracy to today, where at least for younger people, they don't think so?
Well, there's so much in your question, Sue. Thank you. Yeah, no, it was really, really rich and wonderful question. I'm going to start here where you landed, though then I also want to say something about democracies and republics, if that's all right. So for young people, you know, when these statistics, they start to emerge, this fact sort of in survey data in like the early 2010s, and then it got worse and worse, and then this data point that you mentioned. And at first I was confused and surprised by it. And I explained my own sort of coming up in the world, the kind of deep love of democracy I'd been lucky to inherit and carry with me. And then as I sort of talked to young people when I sort of asked them questions about this, it just became kind of blindingly obvious, which was, think about it, it's 2026 now. This is the sort of younger set, really. But if you're 25 or younger, right, you were born after September 11th into a nation at war. Your early childhood is marred by the Great Recession, which put so many families out of houses and disrupted so many families' growth and flourishing. And then as you're barely recovering from that, the country is entering into the single greatest period of polarization it's had since the 19th century. And you're watching the 2016 election, and then you're getting slammed by a global pandemic. And not to mention which AI is going to take away the future for your jobs, and the climate is like collapsing.
Yeah.
So, like, what has democracy done for me lately? Is I think a rational attitude for young people, sadly. So for me, that then speaks to kind of the responsibility for those of us in the older generations who do understand the potential of our institutions. It puts on us, I think, a great responsibility to do the renovation work that enables us to govern much more effectively and address these really significant challenges that we have.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think your emphasis on civics education and reinvigorating that is so important and so crucial. That the disinvestment we as a country have made in teaching civics, right, since the 60s is really stunning.
Yeah, no, we went through a terrible time, sort of the period from the 60s through about 2010, where sort of every decade we invested less and less in civic education. There was sort of less and less of that in schools. And so that is certainly a huge contributing factor as well to that disaffection, for sure.
Well, I know we want to make sure we have enough time for audience Q&A, but I do want to just ask you one more question. And this comes from the tour I took this afternoon of our exhibition. I'd seen the exhibition before, but I decided to linger on the response wall, where we invite our visitors to complete that sentence, "This land is ... I found it such a powerful experience. I want to read to you a couple answers and then see and throw it back to you and see how you might complete that question yourself, or that phrase. So this is just a couple of responses that struck me. This land is scarred, loved, torn, fractured, and beautiful. Troubled, beautiful, breathtaking, not yet at rest. This land is a constantly changing canvas of governments, tribes, temples, churches, monuments, peoples, and motivations. What remains is land. It will be here always. And then one, not gonna make it another 250 years. To which the person posted their own response right next to it saying, gonna make it another 250 years. Don't listen to that guy. So we're already having a conversation among our viewership. So any sort of ways in which you might complete that phrase yourself?
It's funny that you should ask. You gave me the opportunity to sign the lovely guest book that you have that has over 100 years, people who've signed into it. And I signed it saying this land is beautiful. It's my first one. And in particular, the Huntington as a part of that. And inspiring, because the stories of freedom and overcoming, both sides of the balance, are inspiring. And layered, because there is as much tragedy and weeping as there is celebration, and just striated layers, and that's so beautifully clear in your exhibit. And then lastly, empowering, because the commitment to equal human dignity is where our path to flourishing begins. So that's what I said.
Fantastic. I think our curators would be very happy with that response. I think they will feel like they have done what they set out to do, which was to create this tapestry, this canvas, this kaleidoscope of documents and experiences and events and people that will give us, the viewer, a lot of thought, a lot of food for thought. Okay, so we're going to let you have a chance at asking some questions. If you have a question card that you've filled out, there will be people circulating who can pick that up for you, and then we will come and read them from the podium. And I'd like to invite up to the podium Alice Tsai, our Director of Special Projects, who will help us to navigate this process.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I know some of you are really excited because I already got some questions, so I'll jump right in. Danielle, who do you consider as the quote-unquote founding fathers within the context of your work now?
That's a lovely question, and I have an expansive definition of founding fathers. So, of course, it is the folks who were officially in Continental Congress and the folks who officially signed the various texts. But I also count all the other people who contributed to thinking through what this project was of this new form of government. And they had big debates, actually. Hamilton called it a democracy at the time. Others said it's a republic. We still fight about this in Utah. The state law is that kids are literally taught this is a republic, not a democracy. So that's how complicated the vocabulary still is for us. But so who else is in that conversation? Abigail Adams, who I mentioned, Prince Hall, whom I mentioned. You've also got the important Haudenosaunee, Union and Confederation, sort of the native indigenous legal structures that Benjamin Franklin drew on, for example, for thinking about the Albany Plan of Union. So there really is a rich community of people who count as founders. I use the phrase founders.
In your book, Our Declaration, you discuss Shakespeare's Sonnet 94 and how it leads to this question. How does the restraint in one's powers lead to the preservation of one's best self? How would you answer that for all of us in this moment?
Oh my. Who asked that question? Well, thank you for being a reader. I appreciate that. That's very generous. So it's a beautiful question, and that is really at the heart of the philosophy of self-government. That self-government is what we do both, as I said briefly as I was making my remarks, in our private sphere, and also what we do together with others. And this is why this principle about human equality matters so greatly. If you take that seriously, then it's not possible to act well in the world without sharing power with other people. And the only way to share power with other people is to recognize that your interests are entangled with their interests. You have to actually understand that you are better off individually when the community that you're a part of is better off. And once you've linked, I say it's sort of the I to we connection, once you've linked yourself to the sense of the community that you're part of, then it's not so much exactly that you're having to limit yourself or restrain yourself, but your whole conception of interest becomes a kind of equitable understanding of interest. And so there's a kind of growth out of your own development of your powers and ability into that capacity to collaborate with others, to share with others, and so forth. So the point is simply to say that what can be described as restraint in some contexts and limitation is actually the way in which we bring out the best in ourselves. So that is what I think is sort of the link between what's in the Shakespeare sonnet and in the philosophy behind the Declaration of Independence. I hope that's responsive to your question.
You and Sue talked about civics, and there are several questions here about that. So what would a civics class look like if it's actually preparing young people for the kind of citizenship you're advocating for? And in the current moment, for the rest of us, what's the biggest obstacle to reconnecting to civic power and responsibility?
Oh, wow, great. You guys are asking great questions. Thank you. So I have to warn you, I do a lot of work on K-12 civic education, and so I could be here for several hours answering the first half of that question. So I have had just the great joy for the last decade of working on a year-long grade 8 civics curriculum in Massachusetts. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about it to give you a bit of a sense. So for starters, these days, I think effective civic education fuses kind of core knowledge, 3 branches of government, how a bill becomes a law, with opportunities for students to really practice being civic actors. So a lot of project-based learning, and they do nonpartisan student-led civic action projects. But I want to share too that the arc of the year actually follows the Declaration of Independence. So the preamble, the golden apple that I read to you, that's the expression of values. The kids start first unit thinking about their identity and values, like who they are, what's made them what they are, what do they care about and why, what are the sources of those values, what are other people's values, how do they listen empathetically, for example. And then they've got to go into understanding structures of government. That's exactly where the Declaration heads. Then the Declaration heads into grievances. They learn how to draft petitions. They learn how to do their own analysis. What's not working? What do they think could be improved? And then the Declaration heads into the action choice, and they head into their own action project. So they get that core knowledge, they get those core texts all the way through, but they have to own it themselves, develop a sort of civic identity. Who will they be as citizens? So what disconnects all of us? Honestly, I think that the national political scene is like so awful and unpleasant. also distant and opaque, that it makes us all feel very inconsequential, like we can't really make a difference. So what I really encourage people to do is to get reconnected to your municipality. You can absolutely make a difference in your municipality. And the truth is that if we all did that, if we reconnected at the municipal level, it would actually start to change the dynamics of our entire political system. Because the whole thing is actually built at the top level out of the stuff we do at the bottom level. In Massachusetts right now, we're having trouble just getting enough people to run for town office, for like the most basic town offices. We're having trouble filling the most basic roles that towns need just to keep everything going. So there really is a big project for all of us to reconnect to municipal governance. And I know that doesn't directly address all the concerns that you all walked in here with tonight, but it is actually a part of reversing the dynamics that we are witnessing right now.
Maybe one more?
Yes. Okay. And I want to end with another close reader. So the first word is we. We hold these truths to be self-evident. I feel like our American society has lost the we. How do we get it back?
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. I love that. Thank you for that question as well. We have lost the we. I would agree with that. And yes, we need to get it back. But you know what was so great about your question? Was that you asked, how do we get it back? Lots of times people ask me, will we get it back? All right? And what I always say is, it's not a question of whether we will, like we have to get it back. All right? So the only question is, how will we get it back? And the truth is, if we can convert ourselves from being, will it survive, to how will it survive, question askers, we will actually find the answer. It's like, that's actually the beauty of democracy. Like, if we all spend the time asking that question, how will we get the we back, and ask that with our communities, ask it with one person, then ask it with 3, then ask it with 6, we will find the path to that. So I have my ideas about how we can do things to get the we back, but I'm not going to give you that answer, because I think that's exactly the question we should all be asking one another all the time. And I promise we will find the answer if we just keep asking that question with each other in community. Thank you.
That is a great way to end this. Thank you so much. So thank you for being such a great audience. Please join, please feel free to go out into the courtyard for some refreshments and some conversation. Thank you again for coming tonight.